So, is a carnivore diet good for me? Should I be switching over and eating all kinds of meat every day, all day, maybe with some dairy and some eggs and stuff like that? Or should I be like eating like 50-50 maybe? Or 25-75? What should I be doing when it comes to this whole new trend about the carnivore diet? Well, it's not really a new trend. It has popped up through history a few times. There have been people who have recommended eating large quantities of meat. And the thing of it is there is evidence that the carnivore diet can help you. Maybe. If you are descended from fairly recently from the people of the Arctic Circle, such as the Inuits, from areas where there are no plant sources they could consume, so they were only eating bears and seals and walruses and fish and birds and stuff like that, because that was the only thing that was available to them, because it was frozen all year round, then yes, you would be able to survive and maybe even thrive on the carnivore diet. If you have come from a family where many generations have been on the carnivore diet or a primarily carnivore diet, and when I say many, I don't. Why am I making mistakes? It just drives me crazy. I'm getting too old for this. When I say many, I don't mean 2 or 3 or 4. You need several generations, and you also have to look at each generation having fewer and fewer problems with diseases related to eating large amounts of meat. So, for example, diabetes, metabolic disorder, heart attacks, strokes, arteriosclerosis, atherosclerosis, colon cancer, and many other things are caused by high consumption of meat. So if you have a family of meat eaters going back several generations and there is no indication of these diseases that are typically caused by high consumption of meat, or a decreasing incidence generation by generation, then the chances are good, not perfect, but good, that you could probably do okay, if not good, on the carnivore diet. However, there's another caveat. You can't just eat beef. You can't just eat pork. You can't just eat chickens. You need to have a rainbow, so to speak, of different meats, which is to say you need to have a variety of different kinds of meats every single day. So there's going to be beef in there, although beef, there's a lot of counterindications for beef and other red meats. You need to have the pork, you need to have the chicken. I don't think you can get bear and walrus, but you can get deer and rabbits and squirrels and all that kind of stuff. Additionally, fish and other kinds of water-based animals would need to be part of your diet, because that will provide you a broad nutrient profile of vitamins and minerals that you need, except for the things like phytonutrients that only exist in plants. If also you have problems with producing carnitine when you are on a vegan diet, if your body doesn't do that, if your body cannot produce its own cholesterol when you're not eating things that contain cholesterol, which are animal sources, then you need to have meat in your diet. You don't need to be a carnivore, but you need to have meat sources in your diet so that you get those things that your body is not able to make. And this is a genetic variation when you don't produce carnitine. It's a genetic variation when you don't produce cholesterol. Just like it's a genetic variation when you cannot process things like meat and beer and stuff which have uric acid, and that results in gout. That's a variation. Gluten intolerance is a variation. Not everybody has that problem. So if you don't come from one of those bloodlines where meat is by far the dominant food source of a variety of meats, chances are high that initially you may observe some benefits, but over time you will discover that you will have problems. You may end up developing plaque in your arteries, for example. You may end up developing prediabetes, and so on and so forth. These are all indicators that that heavy meat diet of yours is starting to slowly but surely hurt you. In which case, just like Dr. Paul Saladino, who used to be a carnivore, but has now changed his diet to include plant matter, which he didn't even think was necessary or a good idea, because he was starting to have health problems. And there are several other people, I'm told, that were on the carnivore diet and had to back off of it because they were starting to get ill from only eating animals. Now, there are other things that you can look at that will show whether, for example, dairy is something that your body can tolerate a lot of, or eggs. You know, you look back again at the history of your family. If you come from, say, Asia, drinking milk is a relatively new phenomenon in many parts of Asia, and a lot of Asians are lactose intolerant. That means gas, bloating, and diarrhea. Long term, that can lead to digestive problems, and you don't want that. So if you're coming from Asia and you notice you're having trouble after you have a bowl of ice cream, I don't mean like right away. That would be an allergy. I'm talking about intolerance. So within the next day, 2-3 days, you have a big load of diarrhea after a big bowl of ice cream, you are lactose intolerant. I found out the hard way because I came back to the U.S. from Indonesia, where I wasn't eating very much dairy in Indonesia, but I was getting diarrhea when I did, and I just didn't make the connection. But I was consuming a lot of dairy after I came back to Indonesia because I resumed eating cereal in the morning. And then, as a consequence of that, I was getting all this diarrhea, all this bloating, all this gas, and I was like, what's going on? And eventually I realized it was the dairy. And I had become very, very intolerant to dairy. Probably partially because before moving to Indonesia, around the turn of the century, I was a vegan for about a year. And so when you step away from dairy, it increases the likelihoods that your body, if it is producing any lactase, the enzyme that digests dairy, is going to stop because you're not consuming dairy. Same is true of eggs. So, and also eggs do contain a lot of cholesterol. So you do have to be careful about that, especially if your body is, of that genotype where cholesterol is a problem. Now, so if you can't be a carnivore, and most people cannot be a carnivore, no matter how much you love meat, no matter how good it tastes, if your body is giving you signs that you are ruining your health, it's because you can't be a carnivore. So, how much should you eat? Well, if you look at the expert opinions based on all kinds of different studies, scientific studies, including randomized control trials and double blinds and all that, all that stuff, you will see that meat should be a minor component of your life. And especially once you reach the age of full adulthood, you should be consuming 1 or 2 portions of meat, except for fish. Now, you notice I didn't say seafood in general, I said fish. And especially the fish that are oily fish like mackerel and sardines and salmon and stuff like that. And you should be staying away from the predatory fish like tuna and swordfish and marlin, because predatory fish are more likely to contain large amounts of toxic chemicals in them like DDT, PCBs, and mercury than fish on the lower that are lower on the food chain like salmon. Of course, if the salmon is farm raised, it's likely to be deficient in some of the nutrients that you get from wild caught salmon, so it is a trade-off. But if you are avoiding other kinds of meat and you're a pescatarian, you need to make sure that you're eating at least a couple of meals with a portion or two of fish every week. Now, if you are not a pescatarian, if you are just an all-around eater, I would recommend, again, that you should be eating from the age of when you're a little kid until you are a full adult. And that varies from person to person, but it's somewhere around the age of 25 to 30. That you should be eating maybe 3 or 4 portions of meat a day. Now, when I say portions, I don't mean like this. I mean, like a normal, like a filet mignon size portion, perhaps. Maybe 8 ounces per portion. And, historically, we didn't eat a lot of meat. In fact, although it was not known for a long time, because the only thing that tends to show up in the archaeological records are bones from animals we were consuming in the past. So it's very hard to confirm that we were eating roots and berries and all this other stuff. But there has been enough evidence that has been collected to demonstrate that we were not carnivores, and that the people who were heavily carnivorous suffered from the same kind of diseases from overconsumption of meat that we struggle with now. And it's sometimes called the king's diet, because it was very famous that the rich people who were eating diets heavy in meat would get gout, they would get heart attacks, and all these other diseases that are associated with high consumption of meat. So you want to keep your meat consumption, your dairy consumption, and your egg consumption low. If you can't cut them out entirely, that's fine, but they should not be the main component of your meals. They should be a minor component of your weeks, okay? Your main components should be vegetables, fruits, grains, whole grains, and beans and things like that. Now, when I say whole grains, what do I mean? I mean oats and wheat and whole grain, or not really whole grain exactly, but because the outer husk is inedible, but the rice that is not white. White rice is basically just sugar in a capsule form, and your body processes it and turns it into sugar very, very rapidly. And I've touched on sugar in other videos, so I'm not going to touch on that more here. But so you need to step away from processed foods, because a lot of processed foods contain too much sugar and too much salt and too much oil. And also the refined oils you should be careful about, because some refined oils contain trans fats. Also, ruminant animals fat. Ruminants are animals that eat grass naturally, like cows and sheep and goats and stuff like that, water buffalo. They actually naturally have trans fats in the fat. So if you want to be healthier, you should be going for lean cuts of meat if you're going to be eating meat. I know that fat tastes good to us, but it is a risk. If you're going to eat fat from animals, probably better off eating it from other kinds of animals. Fish, maybe chickens and pigs, but not ruminant animals. Okay? That is really the best choice you can do. Now, if you're like totally baffled, look for historically what the Mediterranean diet was. Not currently, because it has shifted with the money-backed influence of certain industries towards processed foods and foods that are not good for our health. So that Mediterranean traditional diet and some of the other traditional diets that are very good for health are being destroyed by the greed of the food and beverage industry. You don't want to follow that current example. You want to go and look at Mediterranean diet books from back 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, not from current day, unless they are taking their information from those old sources. And again, don't focus on eating meat unless you are from that genetic background where you will be okay with meat. If you're an Inuit, hey, have at it. The other consideration when it comes to meat is that ecologically, it is not sustainable. And when I talk about meat, and dairy, and also eggs, it is very, very destructive to the environment that we depend upon in order to survive. If you go to an area where there are large pig farms, you will discover that there's a high incidence in people living around those pig farms of diseases. Very, very dangerous diseases in some cases. And if you go and look at New Zealand and you check out the coastline around New Zealand, wherever there's runoff from dairy farms, the ocean water is dead, pretty much, because there's just so much biological waste that's going in there. It's destroying most of the sea life around New Zealand. And the New Zealand dairy industry is very, very powerful and very much in control when it comes to the laws. So these are just some examples. And for those of you who care about animals, there is a lot of evidence that supports that what we do to animals can tend to be very inhumane, very not just bad for them before their death, before they're slaughtered, but also consequently bad for us. Improper farm raising of animals, be it fish or cows or pigs or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're not feeding them a robust, rounded diet of food that is natural to them, they will be nutritionally deficient. For example, I talked to an ichthyologist or a fish expert from a university when I was in Indonesia, and he explained to me that if you are eating fish that are farm raised and they are being raised using manufactured food, pellets and flakes, those fish will be nutritionally deficient. The flesh will decay more rapidly, the blood will be thinner, and it won't taste as good, among other things. And I know this for a fact because I several times had farm-raised fish in Indonesia, and unless it was fried, it always tasted muddy. Now, maybe you've had catfish that tasted muddy, but that's that's because of something else perhaps, or because they were farm-raised. But it is not a pleasant taste to have fish in your mouth and you feel like you're eating mud. Not feel like, but taste like you're eating mud, because it still feels like fish. So yeah, I hope that this helps. If you have any questions, there are many hundreds of thousands of patient hours of data supporting what I'm talking about. Dr. Gil Carvalho, PhD, on his channel Nutrition Made Simple, has done a lot of research about a huge number of studies that support a plant-based or primarily plant-based diet like the Mediterranean diet, and there is almost no evidence to support carnivore diets, except for those particular genotypes. Also, if you go to the channel Plant Chompers, the scientist Chris McCaskill, I hope I said it right, Chris, sorry, he has done a lot of research. He has read books from even hundreds of years ago talking about diet and nutrition and stuff like that, and he can actually reference books that are being used by fraudulent sources of information about diet and correct them on it. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I would definitely recommend looking at those two channels and keep an open mind to the possibility that with some of these doctors, and I can name a couple based on some of the sources I've seen, Dr. Diamond, Dr. Berry, Dr. Fung, Nina Teichholz, Denise Minger, they are quoting stuff in some cases that actually says the opposite of what they're claiming. Dr. Fung actually is famous for that, and there are several others that do the same thing. I'm not saying they're doing it deliberately. I don't know if it's deliberate or not, except for in the case of Nina Teichholz. She's not a doctor. She is not a scientist. She was a journalist. She's now being paid well by a billionaire rancher. So make what you will of that. So yeah, again, if you have questions, comments, please keep it civil. If you're not going to be civil, I will be probably at least deleting your comments, if not reporting you or banning you, because I don't tolerate abuse. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day.